The space exploration era began in the second half of the last century. But despite the rate of progress and success, there have been casualties in space. 6 years after the first human-crewed spaceflight, which was a success, we recorded the first death of a cosmonaut aboard the Soyuz 1 spaceflight. The Soyuz 11 spaceflight didn't end well either, as it resulted in 3 cosmonauts losing their lives in space. What caused the deaths of these cosmonauts and a host of others? Stay till the end to find out. Space has been graced with over 600 astronauts in the past 60 years. And, as of 2022, there have been different fatal incidents where astronauts were lost in space. 19 astronauts, to be exact, have been lost in space. As previously stated, the first death in space occurred aboard the Soyuz 1 spacecraft. On April 23, 1967, cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov died from injuries suffered during the landing of Soyuz 1. The mission involved testing the capsule and connecting in orbit to Soyuz 2. During the first part of the mission, one of the ship's 2 solar panels failed, and the spacecraft began to lose electricity. This caused some of the capsule's operating systems to fail. Komarov tried opening the panel by spinning the ship around its axis, but it didn't help. The proposed launch of Soyuz 2 was cancelled, and the ongoing flight of Soyuz 1 was terminated, so Komarov commenced with the re-entry procedures. The spacecraft was successfully deorbited, but after re-entry, the ship's parachute system failed for unknown reasons. As a result, the descending vehicle hit the ground at a speed of 50 meters per second, and cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov perished with it. This incident didn't stop the USSR from launching spacecraft into space. On April 19, 1971, the Soviet Union launched the world's first space station into low Earth orbit, named Salyut 1. It was visited by Soyuz 10 and Soyuz 11. The hard docking of Soyuz 10 failed, and the crew had to abort this mission. The Soyuz 11 crew achieved successful hard docking and performed experiments in Salyut 1 for 23 days. However, they were killed by asphyxia caused by the failure of a valve just prior to Earth re-entry, and are the only people to have died above the Kármán line or the edge of space. Salyut's 1 mission was later terminated, and it burned up on re-entry into Earth's atmosphere on October 11, 1971. Cosmonauts Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vlad Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev were aboard Soyuz 11 when it launched into space. They were actually the backup crew. 2 members of the primary crew failed their pre-flight medicals, and thus the backup crew took over. The capsule successfully docked with the Salyut 1 orbital station, and they began their work. They were there to carry out 3 weeks of experiments, such as growing Chinese cabbages and bulb onions, taking spectrograms of stars, and snapping some pictures from orbit of the snow and ice on the river Volga. They had become heroes and gotten famous with the success of their mission. With the crew's primary mission completed on June 29, 1971, the Soyuz 11 undocked from the Salyut 1, and 3 hours later, the cosmonauts fired their ship's engine to return to Earth. Vlad Volkov even joked with the flight control on Earth and asked them to ensure their traditional welcome home gift of cognac would be waiting for them at the landing site. At 25 minutes before touchdown and an altitude of 160 kilometers, both the work compartment and the service module were jettisoned. The space capsule was now the cosmonauts' only defense against the fiery furnace of re-entry. At this time, radio communications abruptly ended when the work compartment separated, well before the normal ionospheric blackout. The pressure in the crew capsule quickly dropped, and all of the air inside began to escape into the vacuum of space. Meanwhile, Mission Control was unaware of the situation and attempted to contact the cosmonauts over VHF radio, but there was an unnerving silence, and a nervous unease crept into the room. 22 minutes before touchdown, Mission Control picked up the capsule on radar as it entered Soviet airspace. Mission controllers knew that because the spacecraft was still re-entering the atmosphere, it would be covered in a cocoon of plasma, and that communication would be impossible during this time. As the minutes went by, hopes for a happy ending got rekindled when the space capsule's drogue parachute automatically deployed and the larger main parachute canopy followed. However, there was still no word from the crew, and 10 minutes before touchdown, helicopter crews spotted the undamaged Soyuz 11 gently swinging back and forth under the perfect-looking parachute. Mission Control was delighted when the helicopter commander said the capsule had landed safely. The recovery team was setting down nearby, and they were just minutes from opening the hatch and treating the cosmonauts to their cognac and other comforts of home after being in space for 3 long weeks. After just 2 minutes of touchdown, the search and rescue team of 2 men reached the Soyuz 11 and then hammered on the ship's hull to let them know they were there. But there was no reply from inside. When they opened the hatch, a look of troubled uncertainty creased the face of one of the rescuers. Inside the capsule, the recovery team saw all 3 cosmonauts slumped over and motionless. Dark spots covered their faces that looked like bruises, and blood was coming from their noses and ears. One of the cosmonauts, Georgy Dobrovolsky, was still warm, but attempts to revive him were unsuccessful. Investigators later learned that a faulty valve was the cause of the space accident. So, based on the position in which the rescue team met the astronauts, the investigators concluded that Dobrovolsky and Volkov had unbuckled themselves from their seats in an effort to find the leak, which was causing the air to escape from the capsule. But the cosmonauts didn't know what caused the leak right away, and they didn't have enough time to save themselves because the cabin was filled with fog after the pressure was released. They were also in a lot of pain and couldn't hear because their eardrums had burst. Their heart rates increased as they searched, but time was not on their side, as Patsev's pulse dropped within 50 seconds as his body became oxygen depleted, and all 3 cosmonauts died within 110 seconds. Their funeral was epic on a grand scale, and the whole country mourned their passing. The Soviets halted all human spaceflights while engineers redesigned the Soyuz spacecraft. All cosmonauts are now required to wear spacesuits during launches and landings. However, Russia isn't the only country to suffer space disasters that cost the lives of brave astronauts. The United States, at the forefront of space travel, also had its fair share. Despite its ingenious engineering in the form of reusable space shuttles, these shuttles had a series of mishaps despite their advancement. In January of 1986, the United States seemed bored with spaceflight since the first space shuttle launch. The program had experienced no trouble since its debut flight in 1981. But everything quickly changed on the morning of January 28th. The crew mission of STS-51L boarded the orbiter Challenger. It was a sunny but chilly morning all across the USA. People were a little more excited with this launch because the crew of 7 astronauts included payload scientist Krista McAuliffe, a civilian schoolteacher, and a mother of 2. She was a part of the Teacher in Space project and proved that space was now wide open. Not just to a top-notch flight pilot, but also to the average American. At 11:38 a.m., the Space Shuttle Challenger lifted off from Cape Canaveral, Florida, with Krista McAuliffe on her way to becoming the first ordinary American to travel into space. But after just 73 seconds, and with hundreds of people on the ground watching, including Krista's family and a group of students, plus millions of viewers watching the launch on television, the space shuttle exploded into a ball of fire and smoke and disintegrated. This incident is a huge tragedy, but what and how did it happen? The cause of the disaster was the failure of the 2 O-rings in the shuttle's right solid rocket booster, or SRB. The record low temperatures that morning of launch had stiffened the rubber O-rings, reducing their ability to seal the joints. The slip digressed from the axis and collapsed under the influence of aerodynamic forces. That brings us to the Columbia Space Shuttle. This mission started on January 16, 2003. The astronauts were on a 16-day mission and successfully conducted around 80 science and research experiments, working 24 hours a day while taking turns. It was time for the crew to return home, and the Space Shuttle Columbia was scheduled to re-enter the atmosphere and land on February 1, 2003. During re-entry, Columbia crashed while returning to Earth, taking all 7 aboard. Approximately 16 minutes before the anticipated landing, communication with the crew was interrupted. As the investigation revealed, the cause of the disaster was a breakdown that arose during the launch. About 82 seconds into the flight, a bit of insulation disconnected from the left fairing, which struck the carbon fiber panel of Columbia's left wing and left a hole, damaging the heat shield. As a result, after entering the dense layers of the atmosphere, the leading edge of the left wing began to heat up more than usual, causing the wing to collapse, followed by the shuttle itself, and that was the end of those brave astronauts. There was one near-death experience faced by space explorers. Former Soviet cosmonaut Sergei Krikalev was left stranded in space for almost a year, 311 days precisely. Krikalev departed Earth for the Soviet space station Mir on May 18, 1991. While he was up there, the Soviet Union fell. The landing area was in the now independent Kazakhstan and caused the delay in his return. He had to remain in space twice as long as originally planned. Because Krikalev spent so much time in space away from Earth's center of gravity, time dilation caused him to be 0.02 seconds younger than other people born at the same time as him. Also, as we know, bones and muscle mass deteriorate in space over time. A little more time in space may spell doom for him. It takes a lot of guts to be the first person to volunteer in space. The 3 Russian cosmonauts and others did their best to do thorough research and explore new horizons, and unfortunately, their journey back to Earth spelled doom from a small malfunction. The Soviet Union did a good job of making them famous because it takes a lot of courage to go where no one has gone before.